They said the valley held nothing but ghosts and silence. But when a lonely cowboy stumbled upon a colossal black horse, scarred, starving, and chained to a tree with a single note tied to its reins, everything changed. Because that note wasn't just an excuse. It was a warning. And what happened after he cut the chains would defy every story Red Butte had ever whispered. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. Red Butte, Wyoming woke to the bite of cold. It was the kind of morning that didn't greet a man so much as test him, thin gray light washing over the valley, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs with every breath. Early autumn in the year of our Lord 1875, though anyone standing on that ridge would swear winter had already made its claim. The pines wore a thin veil of mist that clung stubbornly to their needles, silver threads winding between dark trunks. Down in the basin, the grass was brittle and yellowing the earth, still damp from last night's frost. The wind funneled through the gorge with a whistle that carried miles, cutting across the face like a blade, whispering that the warmth of summer was long gone. Somewhere out in that sweep of wilderness, a creek wound lazily between rocks, its surface as dark as iron beneath the clouded sky. From time to time, the water caught a stray glint of light, a fragment of sun fighting its way through the shroud overhead before vanishing again. The trees seemed to lean in over it, huddled like watchmen guarding secrets. If you stood high enough, you could glimpse the town itself. Red Butte no more than a smudge of wood and smoke pressed into the hollow. A church steeple reached up as if trying to pierce the gloom. A saloon leaned tiredly against its neighbor, and a weather-worn store with its fading sign clung stubbornly to the main street. From several chimneys, thin columns of smoke rose and drifted sideways in the windproof of life, clinging to the valley, even as the cold pressed down. It was not a place for the soft-hearted. Red Butte was the kind of town a mapmaker would overlook, if not for the men and women stubborn enough to carve a living into its soil. Among them, though not truly of them, lived Caleb Hart. Caleb's cabin sat apart from the town, perched on a rise where the tree line began to thin. It was an old structure hewn from logs by his grandfather's hands, then patched and reinforced by his father before him. By the time it passed to Caleb, it was a house in form, but a refuge in spirit, drafty, creaking, but stubborn enough to endure. Much like the man himself. Caleb Hart was 38, though the years sat heavier on him than they had any right to. He was tall, shoulders corded from labor, but his frame carried the gauntness of someone pared down by more than just work. His beard was short, scattered with gray, his hair long enough to curl under the brim of his hat. His eyes, though gray, tired, and watchful, told more truth than the rest of him. They were the kind of eyes that measured every movement, that carried shadows deeper than any man should bear. His clothing spoke of a life well used and near spent. A broad-brimmed hat, bleached almost white by sun and weather. A cowhide coat frayed at the cuffs and stained from years of rain and dust. Boots cracked along the seams, patched more than once, but still carrying him where he needed to go. He had the look of a cowboy who'd ridden further miles than he could count and who no longer cared to add them up. 5 years earlier, Caleb had not been alone. Emily, his wife, and Hannah, their little girl with hair like wheat and a laugh that could fill the room, had lived here too, until the winter sickness came. Red Butte had buried too many that season, and among the graves on the hill were those of Caleb's family. Afterward, he had sold off what remained of his cattle, paid what debts he could, and turned his back on town life. He returned to the cabin of his forebears, not to begin again, but to wait out what was left. Since then, the world had grown quiet around him. He neither drank at the saloon nor prayed at the church. He traded when necessity forced him carrying pelts and firewood down to Clara Boone's general store once a month. Otherwise, he lived as though he were already half forgotten. Inside the cabin, the marks of life were sparse. No dog barked at his heel anymore. The last had died 2 winters past. The rifle hung on its pegs above the hearth, but it was more relic than weapon these days. What remained were the bare essentials: a chipped kettle blackened from years of fire, an axe leaning in the corner, a Bible with pages yellowed and edges curled. And of course, silence. Always silence. Caleb moved through the world like a ghost a man could still bump shoulders with. To the folks of Red Butte, he was that heart fellow spoken of with a shrug or a shake of the head, but rarely with a name. They had grown used to his presence and his absence all at once. He came to town only when the cupboards were empty, saying as few words as he could manage, eyes fixed on the ground. Clara Boone, who had known him since before Emily's death, sometimes tried to draw a smile from him. She never succeeded. On Sundays, when the church bell tolled, Caleb stayed away. On Saturday nights, when laughter spilled from the saloon, he sat by his fire instead, staring into the embers. His world had narrowed to the dimensions of his cabin, the forest paths he walked, and the occasional distant echo of voices that no longer belonged to him. Inside, his grief had hardened into something quieter, but no less dangerous. Memory was his constant companion, slipping into his sleep like an unwelcome thief. In dreams, he saw Hannah's small hand, tugging at his shirt, heard Emily's voice singing softly, while the kettle steamed, felt the warmth of their laughter in rooms that now lay hollow. Each time the vision lingered just long enough to hurt before it slipped away and left only silence. He would wake with his heart pounding, the fire burned low, and the weight of absence pressing down like a stone. Caleb had no quarrel with the living, but no faith in them either. He bore no hatred for the town or its people, but he carried no trust, no need to let them close. What remained was a rhythm. Wake stoke the fire, boil coffee strong enough to mask the bitterness, walk to the creek. Check the trap's return with whatever the forest grudgingly allowed. The days folded into each other, like identical pages in a book he had no desire to finish. The cabin kept him alive, but it also kept him prisoner. Its walls groaned under winter winds. Its hearth smoked in the rain. Its floorboards sighed beneath his steps. The place smelled of wood smoke, leather, and the faint iron tang of tools. Sometimes he would sit for hours in the single chair by the hearth, staring at nothing, letting the tick of the clock mark a time that felt borrowed. This was the shape of his existence, not living, not dying, but waiting. The path along the southern edge of the timber was an old habit his boots kept, even when his mind did not. Caleb let the morning carry him thin sunlight, slipping through damp needles, the smell of sap and cold earth rising with each step. The air was raw and clean, soaked with last night's frost. He carried the same burlap sack he always did, empty and soft against his palm, and walked with the loose, unconcerned tread of a man out only to pass the time. The forest breathed in a slow hush around him. Birds quiet the creek low and dark, somewhere to his right. He drifted that way for a while, watching sun threads find their way through the underbrush, thinking of nothing and of everything, until a sound pried his attention loose. He stopped, listened. Not bird, not squirrel. Metal. A faint, unhappy rasp, iron whirring wood, came and went with the wind. He set his hand on the knife at his belt and tilted his head, waiting. The sound answered again, a weary scrape, then silence. Something in there was trying to move and could not. He left the trail and ghosted through a fringe of low furs boots, careful among deadfall and wet needles. A last screen of brush bent against his coat, and then the woods opened into a small, shadowed pocket. He saw it. At first it was only a shape his eyes named wrong, a downed tree trunk, a heap of midnight cloth thrown at the base of an old pine. Then it breathed, and the breath shook. A horse stood there, or something that had been asked to be a horse too long. It was colossal black from the hollows of its ears down to the feathers at its ankles, the color of coal turned slick by rain. Its mane hung in a rough curtain nearly over one eye. Chains, real chains, not ropes, sank into its hide and wrapped the trunk behind it, 3 cruel loops digging into neck, around the barrel, and over one foreleg. Rust scabbed the metal. The bark beneath was chewed flat where iron had ground the life out of it. The animal kept its head low, nose almost to the ground, a front hoof scuffing at nothing. The shoulders twitched as if the whole weight of its body wanted to fold, and was being held upright by habit alone. In the coat, the blackness broke, where mud clotted and old blood dried to brown. Flies worried what they could in the cold. Every shift made the iron rasp again, and the horse flinched without moving. Caleb did not step forward. He did not step back. He simply stood with his fingers tight on the knife measuring distance angle, the space a hoof might need if a hoof came for him. He had broken horses before, gentled a few, and seen others that could not be taught a language a man could live with. This was not the look of fury. It was the look of a thing past fury. Slowly the horse turned its head and found him. The moment landed with a weight he could feel against his ribs. Eyes the color of burnt honey, rimmed dark like ash, fixed on him. There was wildness in them, yes, there would always be. But it lay under a film of exhaustion so complete, it made the wildness look far away. He'd seen eyes like that in other places, on other mornings, inside doorways, where light was cruel. The horse did not roll them or flash white. It did not snatch at the chain. It stared and breathed, and in the steady heave of that breath was a question he could not hear and could not bear. It was the silence that did it. Horses talk, snort, stamp, squeal. This one made no sound at all, and in the quiet he heard only the faint drag of iron on bark, and his own heart remembering that it had work to do. He took a step slow enough to watch his own boot touch ground. The horse's ears tipped forward. He took another and another, halting when the chain creaked. He could see the raw flesh, where links had bitten a swollen ridge at the throat latch, a bruise beneath a loop that pinned the leg. He could see, too, the strap across the jaw, where a rein stiff with dried mud hung crooked. Something wrinkled there. A scrap of paper gone soft with wet. He lifted his hand, palm open where the horse could see it, and eased his fingers toward the rein. The animal's breath fanned his wrist, hot and sour with empty belly, and he pulled the paper free. He flattened it against his palm, the rain-smeared ink still clinging to the fibers. Too wild. Can't be broken. Forgive me. No name, no date, no mark of who had done this and walked away. He read it once, and his throat worked, read it twice, and his jaw locked, read it a third time, and the last 2 words bent inside him like a nail. Forgive me. He had said that once to a wooden door that wouldn't answer to a little white cross that never moved when the wind came. It had not helped then. It did not help now. He lifted his eyes. The horse was still watching him. He reached without thinking and laid a hand against the chain where it crossed the chest, careful not to press flesh. The animal trembled but did not pull. That was the strangest thing. For all its size, for all it had endured at a human's hands, it did not try to crush him. You too, huh? He said barely above a breath, and the sound of his voice startled him. He took 2 steps back because it is a dangerous thing when a man sees his reflection and does not like it. The space between them swallowed the movement. He turned as if to go. He made it 3 paces into the brush, the note crumpling in his fist, and stopped. He looked back. The horse had not moved. It waited. Not pleading, not begging, those were other eyes and other days, but waiting as if it had time left for one more gamble. The chain creaked when he went back. He let out the breath he'd been holding and felt the morning cold, again clear and bright as a blade. "All right," he murmured, as much warning to himself as to the beast. "All right." He circled to the tree and put his palm against the links. The iron was cold and pitted each seam a crust of orange. On the neck, the chain had sunk into hair and made a raw track that beaded with damp. At the shoulder, it pinched a swell of bruised muscle. Under the belly, it bit. The horse stood as if nailed there, breath rocking the barrel and flaring the nostrils. Caleb slid his knife from its sheath. The bow he had seen most of his life with him, its long blade dulled at the belly, still honest sharp near the hilt. He kept it in his hand, but not like a weapon. "Easy now," he said, a tone he'd once used with his daughter around skittish colts. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Least I'll try not to." At the first kiss of steel to iron, the horse flinched, skin shivering under his palm. The sound the blade made metal against metal cut the morning in two. He set his teeth and angled the point where there was daylight between chain and hide, working not for speed, but for the right bite. The rust fought him. The blade grated and slipped. He steadied it with his thumb and began to saw. It was slow work and close and intimate in a way he had not expected. His world narrowed to the scrape of steel, the smell of old blood and wet hair, the tremor under his fingers. He thought of trenching tools and fence wire and the hundreds of small patient tasks that had once made up a day. He thought of how some knots you could not pull, only cut. The first link gave with a flat crack that ran along the chain like a shiver. The loop around the neck slackened, and the horse drew a breath so deep it swelled against his shoulder. The flesh there showed a weeping line where iron had sat. He could see the strangled skin try to flush. He let the broken end fall and wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. His hand came away gritty, spotted with his own blood where rust had kissed him. "Who did this to you, huh?" The words came on their own, soft and angry. "Damn bastards." The horse shifted its weight, lifted, and set a hoof without stepping. The ears twitched. He moved on. Around the shoulder, the chain had less slack. He slid the knife between metal and hair, found purchase, and set the edge to it. Sawed. The iron whined. His hand shook once. Unexpected, a tremor running from wrist to fingers like a memory of another trembling place and another knife and a basin of water that had cooled too fast. He felt it and stopped and put his palm firm against the horse's coat. The animal's warmth worked through the cold on his skin. "Still with me, big fella?" he asked out of breath. The horse blew softly through its nose, a long feathered sound. The eye he could see blinked, slow, heavy-lidded. He went on. He did not hurry. He let the work take the time it demanded, each link a small battle, each rasping cut like a breath let out of a chest that had been holding too long. The second loop dropped warm against his boot. The horse's barrel lifted and fell, as if the lungs had more room. He loosened the third where it pinned the foreleg. There the iron had eaten worse. He had to dig for a place to fit the edge without scraping raw flesh. He found it pinched his blade there, put his shoulder against the handle, and lean teeth clenched as if he were pulling a stump. The chain spat rust and let go. For a moment, nothing happened. The horse stood as it had been standing, as though the memory of constraint had more power than the fact of it. Then the legs trembled. The great head swayed. The animal buckled to its knees like a carriage collapsing a wheel. Caleb sprang back a half step, instincts old and sound, ready for a lunge, for a last, useless explosion of fight. It did not come. The horse bowed forward under its own weight and settled into the damp duff, a shudder running through the ribs. It trembled, sides fluttering, and then the long neck bent in an arc. He felt down into his own spine. The muzzle came to his shoulder as gently as a hand. He did not move. His body surprised him again by being careful. He let the animal rest that weight, a heavy living heat, against his shirt, and in the thin space between his breath and the horse's breath, something like a bridge rose. He lifted his hand and eased it up the thick, knotted crest of the neck fingers, finding rain-wet hair and new skin. "You done?" he asked, hardly a voice at all. The horse sighed. Not a snort, not impatience, an old man's long exhale. Something that had been carried too far and could finally be set down. The sound made the morning seem larger. Clouds with their winter color hung steady overhead, but the sky had a softer edge along the east now. He folded his knife and slid it. When he pulled back, the horse's head lifted with him, then hovered uncertain near his shoulder. He could see the place where the rain had held the note. He could see the line of the jaw, strong and square. He gathered the broken chain in 2 loops and flung it away from the trunk so it could not tangle a foot. Then he looked at the animal and at the path between here and the cabin, and understood the stupidity and the necessity of what he was about to try. He tugged loose a length of old strap from the rein, smoothed it with his thumb, and passed it gently beneath the jaw, tying it in a loose, forgiving loop that could become a halter if the horse allowed it. He did not speak a command. He did not click his tongue. He simply walked. At first, there was nothing but the soft rip of needles under his boots and the thud of his own pulse in his ears. Behind him, silence. He took 2 steps more, 3, and felt, rather than heard, a movement that was not his. He turned his head. The horse had risen awkward with a deep creak in the joints, like an old door, and stood swaying. It looked at him. He kept walking slow, as if through a dream he did not want to break. The animal made 1 small, decisive step, then another stumbled and came after him. "Well," he said to the trees, "and no one at all, I'll be damned." They went that way through the timber, a man and his shadow made of flesh and bone. He gave the horse nothing more than the line of his back to follow. When the trail narrowed, he moved a branch aside and let it slap his coat instead of the animal's face. When the ground dipped, he slowed. When they crossed the creek on stones dark with moss, he heard the horse's breath catch and steadied the strap, not pulling, not leading, simply offering the choice to come or not. It came. By the time the cabin showed a dull block of weathered wood shouldering out of the pines, he felt the cold all the way through. Smoke, thin and pale, hovered over the stovepipe. He had banked the fire before leaving and was glad for the habit. The old corral beside the house held only memories and weeds. Once there had been 2 geldings within and a filly-born breech. He unlatched the gate that hung a little wrong and swung it wide like an invitation he did not know how to make with words. The horse went in on its own. He did not try to shut it in too quick. He knew better than to confine a thing that had just learned the taste of its own feet again. He lingered by the rail palms open, letting it choose space. When it settled along the far wall, he closed the gate gently and slid the pin through. He went for water, then more sure on those motions than he had been all morning. Bucket to the well rope grating on the windlass, the heavy pull and splash, then the walk back with wet cold slopping over his knuckles. He set the pail down, and the horse dropped its muzzle to it, like a man falling to his knees. The first swallow trembled, the second steadied, the third emptied what he'd brought. He filled it again. From the cabin he fetched what the cupboard would allow. Timothy saved under oilcloth, a handful of carrots gone soft around the edges, but still sweet. He shook an armful of straw into a cleaner corner of the stall and spread it with his boot, making a rough bed. The horse ate without hurry, taking each bite like a thing practiced, not desperate. That steadiness relieved him more than anything since the chain fell, a starving creature that remembered patience had not decided yet to die. He leaned on the half-door and let out a breath he hadn't known he'd held for 5 years. "Guess you still got some fight left, huh?" he said, and his voice had a wryness in it he had not heard from himself in longer than that. The horse flicked an ear and kept chewing. He could see the swelling now without the chain's disguise. He went inside, tore a strip from a clean shirt he would not miss, and brought it back in a basin of cool well water. He did not ask permission. He told with his hands, palms to the neck first, slow and flat, then the cloth damp and folded, pressing around the wound in a circle rather than on top. The horse shivered under the first touch. It then stilled. He kept the compress moving, gathering heat and dirt and some small measure of pain into the cloth and carrying it away again. He worked the same along the shoulder above the leg, where the flesh rose in angry welts. When the horse shifted weight, he gave it space. When it dropped its head with its lips slack, he took that as the only thanks he would ever need. By the time he was done, the day had leaned past noon. He left the animal to its straw and water and went inside. The cabin had never been large nor kind, but that afternoon it seemed less like a room a man endured and more like 4 walls that might hold warmth if given enough chance. He built the hearth from coals coaxed alive, fed it split pine, and watched a flame catch and spring like something that believed in itself. He set the tin pot to boil, stirred cornmeal into water till it thickened, and poured coffee that would bite his tongue. The sounds he had not heard in years filled the house in plainer music than church, the slow grind of a jaw on hay, the clink of bucket iron on the rail, the faint drip of well water from the rim to the floor. The fire spoke in small syllables from the grate. The silence still there changed its shape. It made room. He carried a carrot end to the stall, palm open. The horse considered it breath-warming the heel of his hand and took it between teeth that could cut a man to the bone, but did not. He stroked the jawline and felt a tremor there like the last ripple of a plucked string. Dusk drew its blue shawl over the pines. He refilled the bucket once more, set another twist of hay, and stood with his hands on the top rail, looking at the animal, as if looking at a fire that had pulled him back from a snowfield. "Cabin ain't quiet no more," he said almost to himself, and the words landed in the straw and stayed. He fetched an old army blanket from a peg near the door, shook the dust out of it, and went back to the stall. He showed it first, letting the horse sniff the wool, letting it know the shape. Then he lifted it toward the back, slow, and laid it over the great curved spine. The horse flinched, the kind that starts at the skin more than the bone, and then went still. He smoothed the blanket down with the flat of his palm, feeling the lift and fall of breath beneath. He gave the neck a steady pat. "Rest easy, big fella," he murmured. He did not know when he'd last said a kindness aloud. "You're home." Night came down heavy over Red Butte. The timbered ridges pressed closer in the dark, and the wind pushed hard against the cabin, rattling loose panes until they sang in their frames. The fire Caleb had laid at dusk burned low, only a red bed of coals glowing faintly through the iron grate. He pulled a wool blanket over himself and stretched on the narrow bed he had used for years, though his eyes stayed open long after he shut them. The cabin creaked with every gust. Somewhere beyond the wall, the steady breath of the black horse sifted through the gaps in the boards. That quiet sound was new, not yet familiar, but it filled what would otherwise have been silence. He closed his eyes at last, but sleep came jagged, dragging with it what he had tried to leave buried. Dreams unspooled in fitful flashes, Emily at the table. Hannah's laugh echoing in a sunlit room, the kettle steaming while the fire painted their faces with gold. For a moment, he was back in the old life, whole again. Then the cough began. First soft, then sharp, then racking the small chest of a child, spreading to the mother. The golden light dimmed into the gray of a winter sick room. He was running for medicine boots, slipping on ice lungs, burning with cold. By the time he returned, the house was silent but for the wind outside. When he touched their hands, they were colder than the snow itself. He woke with a choke in his throat. Sweat slicked his chest, running cold beneath the blanket. He sat upright, eyes wild, and for several seconds, he did not know where he was. The fire had died to embers. The window rattled as the wind screamed down off the ridge. He pushed off the blanket and stumbled from the bed legs, unsteady vision swimming. His hip struck the chair, knocking it sideways with a clatter. His hand groped by instinct for the knife on the table, the same motion that had once been survival in another life. Fingers closed around the hilt and drew it. His breath tore from him in quick bursts, chest heaving like a hunted animal's. He stood in the dark corner of the room, knife-ready eyes darting the storm outside and the storm inside, indistinguishable. From the stall came the sound of hooves shifting. It was not violent, not frantic, only the deliberate thud of weight repositioning. The chain of breath he heard through the boards deepened. A shuffle, a stamp, and then silence again. Caleb's pulse pounded against his temples. He could hear his own heartbeat, as if it had escaped his chest. The knife trembled in his grip. Then through the slats of the stall wall, a great head leaned forward. He heard the rasp of coarse mane brushing wood, then felt the warmth of a breath against his bare forearm. He turned, still half lost in nightmare, and found the eyes of the horse watching him from the shadows. They were not wide with fear, nor sharp with challenge. They held instead a stillness so deep, it seemed to pool out into the room. Dark, steady, patient, an anchor when the floor tilted beneath him. Caleb's hand loosened. The knife clattered from his fingers to the table and stayed there. He lowered himself slowly, knees shaking until his forehead rested against the strong curve of the horse's neck. The animal did not flinch. It breathed a long exhale that spread heat through his skin and waited. For a long time, nothing moved. The storm raged at the window. The coals hissed as wind pressed down the chimney. But inside the cabin, the panic bled away. Caleb's breath slowed, the tremors in his hands eased. His forehead stayed against the horse's coat, damp with sweat. He whispered hoarsely, not sure if he spoke to the horse or to the ghosts themselves. "You ain't scared of ghosts, huh?" Midnight did not answer, but it did not leave either. Morning came, pale and cold sunlight, leaking thin through the frost-clouded glass. Caleb roused early, stiff from where he had slumped in the chair near the stall. His shirt clung damp to him, his hair plastered from sweat, but his chest was lighter than it had been when the dream woke him. He knelt by the hearth and coaxed the embers back to flame. The small blaze filled the room with the comfort of ordinary tasks. He boiled water-ground bitter beans into a tin pot and poured the first coffee of the day. The taste was as black and sharp as always, but this morning it did not feel like punishment. From the stall came the quiet crunch of hay. He walked out to look. The black horse, still nameless on his tongue, though the thought of a name had begun to circle him, chewed deliberately, head, low ears, flicking. The swelling on its neck had gone down where Caleb's bandages had held through the night. He lingered at the rail mug in hand, watching the rhythm of those jaws steady as a heartbeat. The sight calmed him. Then came the sound of hoofbeats that were not the horse's. He looked up sharply toward the trail. A figure rode out of the trees, tall in the saddle gray, in beard and hair, shoulders square beneath a dust-worn coat. The sheriff. Amos Walker sat his horse like a man who had carried both law and weight a long time, his eyes set and serious as ever. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his grip. They watched each other across the short distance, two men who had known each other by necessity more than friendship. Neither wasted words on greetings. Walker dismounted with a grunt and walked forward, boots crunching frost. His gaze slid past Caleb to the stall where the black horse stood ears forward, chewing calmly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He took a breath, scratched the side of his jaw, and finally spoke. "You know who that is, right?" His voice carried the gravel of long years. Caleb said nothing. He only sipped the bitter coffee, eyes steady. Walker jerked his chin toward the animal. "That Percheron's been passed round from auction to auction. Ranchers, wranglers, railroad outfits, they all tried their hand. Couldn't keep him. Left bones broke in his wake. And one man dead." The words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Caleb's face showed no shift, no surprise. He kept his eyes on the animal, which had turned its head toward the sheriff, with mild curiosity but no spark of violence. Walker took a step closer, lowering his voice. "That horse ain't no gift, Caleb. He's a death warrant walkin'. A man ties himself to that kind of beast, he best be ready to pay for it." It was not a threat. It was an old man's warning, spoken with the weight of someone who had buried friends before. Caleb finally lifted his eyes. They met Walker's for a moment, hard as stone, then flicked back to the horse. Midnight had gone back to chewing hay, unbothered, calm, as if no judgment in the world could stick to him. Maybe Caleb said quietly, the corner of his mouth tightening. He lifted his mug in a small motion that was neither salute nor dismissal. "But he's walking still." Walker studied him a long moment, then gave a single nod as if nothing more could be said. He mounted his horse again, swung the reins, and trotted back down the path toward Red Butte. The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the trees. Caleb stayed on the porch long after the coffee in his cup gone cold. He held it anyway, staring into the trees where the sheriff had vanished. The lawman's words echoed in his head, a death warrant walk-in. He was not afraid of horses. He was not afraid of dying either. Those things had lost their sting years ago. What gnawed at him was something subtler, spun of the fear that perhaps there was still something left in the world worth keeping, and that he might lose it again. He turned his head. The black horse lifted its eyes from the hay and looked back at him. No rope bound it, no high fence held it penned. Nothing stopped it from leaving if it chose. But it had not left. It was still there. And that Caleb thought was already saying something. He drained the last swallow of cold coffee, set the cup down on the railing, and let out a breath that frosted in the morning air. Inside, the fire snapped in the hearth. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and distance. In the stall, the horse bent to eat again, patient, present, unafraid. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the stiffness ease. For the first time in a long while, he thought perhaps the cabin did not look so much like a prison. Perhaps it looked a little like a home. The mornings had begun to soften. The ridge still held frost, and the pines dripped cold beads of water where the sun touched, but the air no longer bit quite as sharply as it had the week before. A hush lay over the clearing by the cabin, the kind of silence that carried only small sounds, the steady scrape of bristles across a coat, the rhythm of a man, working with patient hands. Caleb stood beside the great black horse, one hand braced against the stall rail, the other moving a stiff brush down the arch of its back. The animal stood still, its eyes half-lidded, tail swishing lazily whenever a fly dared to land. He worked the strokes long and even coaxing clumps of dried mud and burrs out of the mane. At first, his hand had fumbled awkward from years of neglect and disuse. But slowly the movement grew natural, and the sound of the brush rasping through hair took on its own cadence, almost soothing. Sunlight spilled through the cracks in the boards, gilding the horse's hide where he had already brushed it clean. Midnight's coat shone dark as oil black, yet lustrous like burnished metal catching light. The horse shifted its weight once, sighing through its nostrils, and then stilled again. Content. Caleb's face, usually held in a frown or blank stillness, softened as he worked. A faint crease at the corner of his mouth turned upward, not wide enough to be called a smile, but wider than anyone in town had seen from him in years. He was murmuring something under his breath, nonsense words, the kind one used with animals without thinking, when a scuff of boots on the path behind him made him turn. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing. Clara Boone, dressed in her serviceable brown skirts and a shawl wrapped against the morning chill, held a cloth sack in her arms. She had been on her way to knock at the cabin door, as she always did once a month when she delivered Staples' flour salt coffee. But she had stopped when she saw him. Her brows arched as if she had stumbled upon some rare sight. Caleb blinked, straightened brush still in hand. Midnight turned an ear toward her, gave one measured look, then dropped his nose back toward the hay at his feet. Clara stepped closer, balancing the sack on her hip. "Well, I'll be," she said, voice carrying a teasing edge. "Funny thing. You smile more with that beast around than you ever smile at folks." Heat rose into Caleb's cheeks, and he turned back toward the horse. "Don't mean nothing," he muttered. "Doesn't it?" Clara set the sack down on the porch rail. She came nearer to the stall, her eyes roving over the horse's height and breadth. Midnight watched her for a moment, head lifted slightly, then bent once more to his hay, untroubled. Clara's lips curved into a smile that was softer than her words. "Seems he disagrees." Caleb did not answer. He returned to his brushing, though his strokes had grown slower, thoughtful. Clara lingered long enough to see that expression remain calm, unguarded, before she turned back toward the path, shaking her head with quiet amusement. 2 days later, a group of children wandered up from the pastures on the far side of the ridge. They were supposed to be tending goats, but gossip in Red Butte traveled faster than herds, and word had reached them of the black giant kept in Caleb Hart's corral. Curiosity tugged them up the trail, until they clustered at the split rail fence, peering through with wide eyes. Caleb was on the porch, whetstone in hand, running it down the length of his Bowie knife. The rasping sound stopped when he noticed the small heads bobbing behind the posts. 4 of them, 3 boys and 1 girl, stood in a line, shifting from foot to foot. The eldest, a tall, gangly boy with a straw hat too big for him, cleared his throat. "Mr. Hart," he called, voice half cracking. "That's your horse Caleb," squinted at them. Then he looked toward the corral, where Midnight raised his head and pricked his ears, watching. Slowly, Caleb nodded. The youngest boy, maybe 6, piped up next. He bite Caleb weighed his words. His gaze lingered on Midnight, then returned to the children. "Not if you come gentle." He set the knife and stone aside and walked down the steps. The children shifted nervously as he unlatched the stall gate and slipped inside. Midnight followed him with his eyes not moving until Caleb's hand touched his neck. He patted the horse once steady, then glanced at the children. "Come on then," he said. The eldest hesitated, but the little girl, freckles bright against her cheeks, stepped forward first. She edged through the open gate hands, clasped in front of her. Midnight lowered his head, nostrils flaring as she approached. She reached out one tentative hand and laid it against the tangle of mane. Midnight did not stir. Her face lit, and she whispered, "He's soft." The others followed her lead. A boy reached up to stroke the broad shoulder, another brushed his hand along the flank. The smallest giggled with surprise at the warmth beneath the coat. Their voices mingled in rising wonder. Midnight stood calm in the center of it, ears flicking lazily, tail swishing. From the porch, Caleb watched arms crossed over his chest. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in thought. This horse, the one Sheriff Walker had called a death warrant, stood now encircled by children calm as a gelding in a Sunday parade. The words Amos had spoken echoed in his ears, yet here was the truth before him. Not a demon, not a killer, but a creature weary of battle content to trust, if given reason. "What's his name?" the eldest boy asked, suddenly turning toward him. Caleb opened his mouth and then paused. He looked at the horse again. A name carried weight. After a breath, he said simply, "Midnight." The children repeated it with delight. "Midnight," they chorused, clapping their hands. Caleb's lips twitched upward. It wasn't pride in the name. It was the feel of being asked, of being answered, of being part of something after so long in silence. When the goats bleated from the tree line and called the children back to duty, they waved and ran down the path, their laughter trailing behind. Midnight watched them leave, then lowered his head again to the hay. Caleb stepped closer, laid a rough hand along the horse's neck, and let out a low breath. "Maybe you ain't a beast after all," he murmured. The days that followed seemed to turn a shade lighter. Caleb found himself rising earlier, not from restlessness, but from a purpose he hadn't felt in years. The chores came easier with Midnight's presence. He mucked the stall without complaint, fetched water from the well, brushed the animal until the coat shone. The rhythm was steady anchoring, and people noticed. Clara, passing again with a delivery, saw him leading the horse around the clearing, testing its stride. The children, when they crossed with their flocks, lingered longer by the fence, calling greetings to Midnight, as if he were already theirs. Even the neighbors who had once shaken their heads at old Hart's madness began to murmur differently. For Caleb himself, the change was quieter but deeper. Nights still brought dreams, but when he woke, gasping, the sound of Midnight's breathing steadied him. Days still carried loneliness, but when he looked up from his work, there was another soul watching unjudging. He had begun to speak more often, not in conversation, but in murmured fragments. "Easy, big fella. That's enough for today." Words that sounded strange in his mouth at first, but grew easier, natural. Once, while brushing along the horse's flank, he caught sight of his reflection in the water trough. The face staring back was still lined, still weary. But there was something softened in the eyes, something that had not been there for a long while. He straightened, laid his palm against Midnight's neck, and thought, perhaps we are both finding our way back. The days had grown colder again, autumn sliding toward its harsher edge. Nights brought frost that clung white to the rails of the corral and silvered the grass in the clearing, and by afternoon the air carried the sharp tang of winter waiting its turn. It was on such an afternoon that Caleb saddled his coat tighter and took hold of Midnight's rein. The horse followed with his steady, weighty stride as Caleb led him south through the trees. They walked the narrow game trail that bent along the creek, the path Caleb knew by heart. He had not told himself the reason until they were halfway there, but he knew it all the same. Some things needed finishing. Some ghosts needed burying. The forest was hushed, the kind of silence that magnified every twig snap beneath their boots and hooves. The air smelled of wet earth and resin, that deep, living breath of pine that seemed eternal. As they came into the glade by the southern creek, Caleb slowed. The tree was still there, the old pine that had stood sentinel for longer than any man in Red Butte had lived. Its bark bore fresh scars where the chains had once strangled flesh and wood alike. The ground still carried the dark impression where hooves had dug in vain. Midnight came to a halt behind him, ears swiveling but body calm. His gait was stronger now, muscles fuller from feed and rest, and his eyes, though they still carried something wild, no longer sagged with exhaustion. Caleb turned and laid a hand on the stallion's neck before setting down the small burlap sack he had brought. From it, he drew an old glass jar cloudy and chipped at the rim. He opened it and carefully smoothed the wrinkled scrap of paper he had found weeks before, the words still faint but legible. Too wild. Can't be broken. Forgive me. For a long moment he held it in his palm. Then with a deliberate care he rolled the paper into a small coil, slipped it inside the jar and pressed the lid down tight. He set the jar by the roots of the pine. With no shovel, only his calloused hands, he dug into the hard ground. The soil was cold stiff with the onset of frost, and the roots of the tree snarled through it like veins. Dirt lodged under his nails, the skin of his knuckles split and bled, but he kept digging until there was space enough. He placed the jar inside, pushed earth back over it, and pressed it flat with both palms. Then he drew his Bowie knife, and leaned toward the bark. The steel bits slowly scraping in uneven strokes until the words took shape. Midnight is home now. His hand trembled, the lines uneven, but the letters were clear. He wiped his blade on his coat and stepped back. The wind shifted. A low sigh moved through the tops of the trees, a sound like breath being let out after holding too long. Caleb stared at the scarred trunk and felt the moment settle. Behind him, Midnight stood still, his head raised, ears forward, as if witnessing his own rite of passage. He did not move, did not resist, only watched. Caleb reached back, resting his hand briefly on the horse's chest. "It's done," he murmured. They turned to leave. Hoofbeats broke the quiet before they had gone 10 steps. Caleb froze instincts, tightening his grip on the rein. He turned toward the ridge where the trail widened and a figure appeared. The rider was broad across the shoulders, seated high on a rangy bay stallion. His coat was trimmed in spotted hide, his hat black as tar, his jaw shadowed beneath a thin beard. A pipe jutted from his mouth, smoke curling from it, even in the chill air. His posture carried the self-assurance of a man who had made his living off others' sweat and their fear. Jedediah Crow. Caleb knew the name, as did most who lived within 100 miles. Crow was a horse trader with a reputation that soured faster than meat in the sun. Some called him a wrangler, others a thief. Caleb called him trouble. Jed drew his horse to a halt, eyes narrowing on the black figure standing just behind Caleb. Then his mouth twisted into a grin. "Well, well," he said, smoke spilling from between his teeth. "I'll be damned. Thought that devil was dead by now." Caleb's jaw tightened. His hand rested on the saddle strap, steadying himself. He did not answer. Jed swung one leg over and dropped to the ground, boots crunching. He strolled forward with the lazy arrogance of a man who believed the ground itself belonged to him. He gave the old pine a hard kick, sending bark splinters flying. "He's mine, Hart," he said, voice oily with confidence. "Bought him fair." You think a piece of wire and a pitiful note breaks that Caleb's silence held. His eyes followed Crow's every step, shoulders squared. Midnight shifted behind him, stamping once, but Caleb held steady. Jed tapped ash from his pipe and smirked. "You know the history, don't you? This ain't no pasture pony. He's been passed around more times than a deck of cards in a saloon. Lumber outfits tried to work him busted fences instead. Rodeo men thought they'd make a show, he threw him harder than they'd ever been thrown. He's gored more than one broke bone, sent men limping. One poor bastard never stood again." His tone carried no sympathy, only relish. Caleb's face remained unreadable. Jed pointed with the stem of his pipe toward Midnight. "And you think he's calm now? That's 'cause he's waiting. Waiting for a reason to tear again?" He stepped closer, smoke curling around his grin. That beast'll fetch me gold. In an arena, he's a fortune. And if not, well, there's money in meat too. Caleb shifted his stance, blocking the path between Crow and the stallion. His voice came low hard. You left him to rot. You gave up your claim. Jed's grin widened. That's not how ownership works, friend. Caleb's hand moved slightly, his fingers brushing the hilt of the bowie at his belt. He did not brandish it, only let the motion speak for itself. His eyes met Jed's without blinking. He ain't yours no more. For a moment, the two men stood locked in silence, the air heavy with the weight of the standoff. The forest seemed to draw breath with them. Wind stirred the high branches, sighing through the needles. Crow let the silence stretch, then began to pace slow circles, eyes flicking between Caleb and the horse. He looked not unlike a predator, testing the mettle of another. He struck a match on his boot heel, relit his pipe, and drew in a lungful before blowing smoke toward Caleb's face. You got yourself a legend, Hart, he said, words dripping scorn. Problem is, legends don't stay quiet long. Folks hear folks come, and when they do, you'll find out what kind of fire you've been holding. Caleb didn't flinch. Midnight stood behind him, head low, but ears alert, nostrils flaring faintly. Jed laughed, once short and cruel. He turned, mounted with a practiced swing, and gathered his reins. You just watch. That horse draws fire like thunder draws lightning. Someone's gonna come sniffing. You'll see. He leaned down as his horse turned to go, adding, and when they do, I'll be there, waiting to collect. The bay trotted off, hooves striking sharp on rock, then faded down the trail. The smell of pipe smoke lingered in the clearing after he had gone. Caleb stood still a long while. The words clung to him like burrs, refusing to shake loose. Midnight stepped forward until his muzzle brushed the back of Caleb's coat, a silent presence. Caleb exhaled, reached back, and let his fingers rest against the warm skin. When Crow's hoofbeats were long gone, Caleb sank onto a flat rock near the creek. The cold of it seeped through his coat, grounding him. His mind swirled anger at the man, dread at his words, the knowledge that Crow was not the kind to give up. Beneath it all was something else, sharper than fear clarity. Midnight stood beside him, close enough that their breaths mingled in the chill air. The horse's gaze held no fear, no trace of his old chains, only presence. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the water slide past over smooth stones. You got a past, he murmured. His voice sounded rough to his own ears. I know. Hell, so do I. The horse's ear twitched. Caleb let his eyes drift to the pine where the words, "Midnight is home," now shone fresh against the bark. His carving was crude, uneven, but it was there, carved deep enough to last. He nodded once slowly. The decision formed like iron, cooling in his chest. If Crow or anyone else tried to take this horse again, they would have to pass through him first. He pushed to his feet, laid a hand against Midnight's shoulder, and turned back toward the path home. The wind eased through the trees, carrying the faint smell of pine and earth. And in its quiet, there was a vow neither man nor beast needed to say aloud. The evening began with a hush that did not feel natural. The valley had been restless since late afternoon, a restless wind prowling out of the south. Birds rose in frantic flocks and disappeared over the ridges, and the light took on that strange flat gray that came before violence in the sky. Caleb stood by the corral, hammer in hand, driving nails into a loose board along the stall wall. The work kept his mind from drifting, though his eyes flicked more often than usual to the horizon. The air smelled sharp metallic, as if the clouds themselves were brewing iron. His strokes slowed. Far away, rolling across the timbered hills, came the first low thunder. Caleb looked up. The sky had darkened in patches, clouds boiling together into heavy black slabs. Lightning forked pale and quick along the horizon, like silver serpents writhing through the gloom. He finished the last nail, set the hammer aside, and led Midnight into the stall. The horse's ears twitched, his eyes following every rumble. Caleb filled the trough with fresh water, threw in a measure of hay, and laid an old blanket across the boards. He latched the door firm, gave the horse a pat across the shoulder. "Best stay put," he muttered. The air pressed closer with each passing minute. Caleb crossed the clearing and stepped inside his cabin. He laid more logs on the fire, checked the shutters, set a candle on the table in case the wind tore out the flame. The walls groaned under the pressure, and outside the trees shivered against the sky. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the crack. The rain broke with a roar. It came in sheets, hammering the roof, rattling the shutters like fists. Wind howled between the gaps of the pines. The storm was on them in minutes, not hours. Caleb sat rigid in his chair, coffee cooling in his hand, listening to the world unravel. Then a different sound broke through the noise, a frantic pounding wood splintering, a sharp cry that cut deeper than the thunder. The stall. Caleb shoved the mug aside and bolted for the door. The rain swallowed him whole the moment he stepped outside, soaking him to the skin. He sprinted through the mud toward the corral. Lightning split a tree somewhere above, white and violent. The stall door banged loose, its hinge twisted, the whole frame shuddering. Inside, chaos. Midnight thrashed like a creature born of the storm itself, eyes showing white foam flecking his muzzle. His hooves struck the boards with savage force, shattering one rail, then another. His chest and flanks gleamed wet with rain and blood where he had cut himself on the broken wood. His scream ripped through the night, wild and terrible, as if all the chains of his past had returned in a single instant. Caleb's heart hammered. He edged closer, voice low against the thunder. "Easy, boy. It's just a storm." But the horse could not hear him, or would not. Panic had swallowed reason. Midnight crashed backward into the far corner, trembling, his breath ragged and sharp. The boards shook under every blow. A crack of lightning hit a pine just beyond the clearing, exploding bark with a gunshot crack. The flash seared the sky white. Midnight bolted, leaping forward with all his weight slamming against the stall door. The frame gave way in a splinter of wood and iron. Caleb jumped aside as the massive form lunged past him, rain spraying off the animal's hide. He turned in time to see the stallion plunge through the clearing, shoving the cabin door wide with his chest and charging inside. "Damn it," Caleb breathed, running after. The sight inside stopped him cold. The black horse filled half the cabin, his body heaving with terror, sides slicked with sweat and rain. He had driven himself into the far corner by the hearth, trapped between the wall and the stove. His flank struck the stone, his teeth bared as he snapped at shadows, hooves clattering against the floorboards. The heat of the fire made steam rise from his wet hide. He panted in harsh, uneven bursts, eyes rolling white in the dim light. Caleb's instincts screamed at him to keep distance. One wrong step, one misjudged lunge, and the weight of the animal could crush him. But the sight of that trembling mass pressed against the wall like a hunted thing froze him with something deeper than fear. He knew that look. He had seen it in himself waking from dreams in the dark. Slowly, he stepped inside, pushing the door closed behind him against the rain. He did not speak right away. He crossed the room at an angle not toward the horse, but toward the hearth. He sank to the floor with his back against the stones, just near enough for the stallion to see him without threat. The storm roared above them, but inside, Caleb made his voice quiet. "I know what this is," he said. His words were almost lost in the thunder. "I've been there." The horse snorted, stamping once, but he did not lash out. His body trembled like a bowstring drawn too tight. Caleb pulled off his hat, laid it on the boards. He drew in a breath and let it out slow. Then deliberately, he dropped to his knees, his palms pressed flat against the floor in front of him, showing empty hands. His voice cracked with the weight of the promise he had not made to anyone in years. "I ain't leaving you," he whispered. "Not ever." The room fell to stillness save for the storm. Rain hammered the roof, thunder cracked, but between them, silence hung. Caleb stayed kneeling, eyes closed, refusing to demand, refusing to command. He offered only presence, steady and bare. A long time passed. He could hear his own heartbeat over the storm, then a shift. The stallion's breathing slowed, his trembling easing notch by notch. He shook his head, ears flicking, then lifted one hoof forward. Another. The floor creaked under the weight as he crossed the short space. His nostrils flared hot breath, brushing Caleb's cheek. Finally, the heavy head lowered. The weight of it pressed onto Caleb's shoulder, damp and trembling, but resting. Caleb exhaled a sound halfway between relief and gratitude. He raised one hand steady this time and ran it along the arch of the horse's neck. The hide was wet and cold beneath his touch, but alive. "You stayed," he murmured. The stallion sighed deep and shuddering as though laying down a burden older than the storm itself. The storm lasted the better part of the night. Lightning came and went. Rain crashed and eased. Wind screamed and settled. Through it all, Caleb sat against the wall with midnight beside him. At some point, exhaustion claimed him, and he slept with the horse's weight leaning over him, the fire casting dim shadows across both their forms. When dawn finally came, it broke golden and clean. Sunlight pierced the cracks in the shutters, streaking the cabin with lines of pale fire. The storm had passed without felling trees or tearing roofs. It left only silence, washed and shining. Caleb stirred stiff in his back and shoulders. He blinked into the morning light. The horse still stood where he had fallen asleep, head drooping, eyes half closed, a picture of weariness, but not of fear. Caleb pushed himself upright, stretching against the ache in his spine. He looked at the stallion, then let out a low chuckle. "Guess we're both still standing." He moved to the door and pulled the latch. Fresh, cold air swept inside, carrying the smell of damp pine and earth. Midnight lifted his head, ears twitching, then stepped forward. He walked past Caleb through the doorway and onto the porch. There was no rope to guide him, no reins, no urging. He went because he chose to. Caleb followed. They stood side by side at the clearing's edge. The storm had rinsed the valley clean, leaving every pine needle dripping silver. Mist clung to the low ground, and the sun crowned Midnight's dark form with a mantle of light. His coat shimmered dark and wet, but shining as though clothed in silver itself. Caleb placed his hand on the thick mane and leaned slightly into it. His voice was low, almost reverent. "We got through it. Together." The horse flicked his tail, then stood quietly, as if the words were already understood. And in that quiet, Caleb felt the certainty settle. Midnight was no longer merely a beast rescued from chains. He was the only soul who had pulled Caleb through a storm, both outside and in. The morning after the storm broke bright and clean. The valley shimmered as though washed by God's own hand, every blade of grass jeweled with water, every pine needle glistening. Mist lifted slow from the hollows, burned away by the climbing sun. Caleb stood on the eastern ridge above Red Butte, with Midnight beside him. From there, the town was no more than a scattering of rooftops and smoke threads rising from chimneys. The church steeple caught the morning light and even the sagging roof of the saloon seemed touched with grace. Neither man nor horse moved much. They simply stood, two silhouettes carved against the wide sky, no halter, no tether, no fence between them. The stallion's hide gleamed in the honeyed light, and the long shadow of Caleb Hart stretched beside him. For the first time in years, the cowboy's chest felt open, not hollow. He breathed, and the air did not weigh heavy. Hoofbeats sounded on the slope below. A rider approached at a measured pace, Reverend Elias Moore, the old preacher whose voice had rung through the valley for decades. He dismounted with care, leaning on his hickory staff, and came to stand a few yards away. His eyes lingered on the black horse, then on Caleb, and he gave a quiet nod. "Sometimes the Lord don't give us tame creatures," Moore said, his voice low but certain. "Sometimes he gives us wild ones, to teach us something." Caleb did not answer at first. He only let his gaze rest on the horizon on the line where mountains shouldered the sky. Then a corner of his mouth bent into a faint smile. Midnight flicked his ears, but did not shy, did not retreat. He stood with the steadiness of an oak breath, even body calm. The Reverend studied the sight for a long while, then said softly, "He found his keeper. And you found your way back." Caleb's smile deepened just enough to crease the weathered lines at his cheeks. He did not argue. He had no need to. By the week's end, word of what had happened on the storm night had spread through Red Butte. Folks had whispered about the devil horse for months, but now the whispers carried a new edge. Curiosity, doubt, hope. On a clear afternoon, Clara Boone arrived at the cabin with a basket under her arm and 3 children trailing her, the same goat herders who had once dared creep near the corral. This time, there was no sneaking. Clara called out cheerfully from the gate. "We brought apples," she said. "Figure he might like 'em." Caleb leaned on the fence rail, eyes narrowing slightly, but he did not send them away. Behind him, Midnight grazed idly near the porch tail, swishing at flies. His ears pricked when the children approached. The youngest girl, freckles bright against her cheeks, stepped forward first. She held up a red apple in her small hand. Midnight lowered his great head, sniffed once, then took the fruit delicately between his teeth. Juice dripped down his lips as he crunched, and the girl's giggle rang through the clearing. "Whoa," one boy whispered wide-eyed. Another exclaimed, "Look at that." Their wonder was not laced with fear, only amazement. Clara's gaze shifted from the horse to the man. She had looked at Caleb with pity once, and with exasperation other times. Today her eyes held something different, quieter. Respect. A ranch hand riding by on the trail slowed, tipped his hat, and laughed. "Well, damn. Reckon that beast's got more manners than Jed Crow ever did." Caleb gave no answer. He only rested his hand on Midnight's neck, fingers sinking into the thick mane, the gesture simple but final. That day the cabin yard filled with sounds it had not known for years. Children's laughter, Clara's voice, the crackle of a pie warming on the hearth. And among it all, the black stallion stood at ease, no chain, no stall part of the picture, as though he had always belonged. Justice has its own clock, and it turned soon after. Sheriff Amos Walker received dispatches from Jackson Hole papers marked with testimony and seals. Jedediah Crow had been under suspicion for months, selling horses without papers, trading stock across county lines, beating beasts too wild to fetch coin otherwise. Witnesses stepped forward. Men admitted they had seen Midnight bound to the tree, left to starve. Amos rode out to Crow's shack with 2 deputies, but the man was gone. His stable stood empty, doors swinging on broken hinges. Ledgers scattered the floor, filled with debts he'd never pay. By sunrise, Jed Crow had slipped away like smoke on the wind. An arrest warrant went out across Fremont County, but in Red Butte the matter was already closed. At the saloon, men who had once laughed at Caleb muttered over their glasses. One of them spat and said, "Looks like the devil we feared wasn't the one with hooves." No one argued. No one missed Crow. He faded from memory as quickly as he had vanished, and Red Butte chose not to call him back. Weeks later, the air turned crisp, the mornings white with frost. Caleb stepped from the cabin, carrying an old saddle, the leather cracked, but carefully mended. Midnight waited by the fence, dark eyes steady as if sensing what was coming. Caleb laid a hand on the strong neck, stroking once. "You ready, big fella?" The stallion did not shift, did not balk. He only lowered his head, allowing the man to settle the saddle across his back. The cinch tightened, the stirrups hung loose. Caleb's breath caught as he slid his boot into the iron and swung up. The horse shifted a single step, then stilled again. For a long heartbeat, they held one another's gaze. Then Caleb touched a hand to the thick mane. "Let's go see what's out there." They moved together, first at a walk, then a trot, then a rolling canter across the open meadow. The sound of hooves carried over the valley strong and even. Grass bent beneath the rhythm, and the mountain walls sent the echoes back like applause. From the town road below, children shrieked with delight. "He's riding him. He's really riding." They chased along the fence line, waving their arms. Caleb did not look back. He leaned into the motion wind, tugging at his hair, the sun blazing down. For the first time in half a decade, a true smile cracked his face, one that reached his eyes. The grief had not left him, but it no longer owned him. Man and horse moved as one, not through conquest, not through breaking, but through trust freely given. Later, someone in town asked Caleb how he'd done it, how he had broken the black stallion no one else could handle. Caleb's answer was simple. Didn't. He just stopped running. And so did I. People nodded as if they understood, though most did not. But the words lingered repeated in kitchens and around fires. Midnight was no miracle horse. He did not leap fences higher than others or race faster than wind. He carried scars that would never fade, a limp that appeared on cold days, a wary look that sometimes returned at sudden sounds. He was not extraordinary, except that he had given back life to a man who thought his was finished. In Red Butte, stories grew anyway. Folks told of the chained horse left to die, of the cowboy who had not spoken to another soul in years, of the night storm that broke open the sky and welded the two together. The tale bent with each retelling, but the truth held steady. Two broken creatures had chosen not to leave each other. Midnight became more than a horse in those stories. He was forgiveness Caleb had finally allowed himself. He was the reminder that even abandoned souls could be seen, could be wanted. And he was freedom, not freedom from scars, but freedom to walk with them unashamed. At the edge of the southern creek, the old pine still bore the carving, "Midnight is home now." Rain had darkened the cuts, bark had swelled around them, but the words remained. No one tried to erase them. Few understood their full weight. But Caleb did, and that was enough. The man who had once lived like a shadow now rode tall along the ridges, the great black horse steady beneath him. The two of them were no legend, no myth. They were simply survivors. But in a place like Red Butte, sometimes survival itself was enough to inspire belief. And belief, after all, was the beginning of being whole again.